All right, so our program this week is called Communicating Persuasively to Achieve Social Change. And what we've been doing this week is we are talking about different ways that we can look at different social issues and then how we can respond to them, and using a bunch of different tools to respond and create social change. And today we're going to be focusing on speech and debate and how that's a tool for change. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about our session that I've been leading, and then we're going to go into and talk about how speech and debate can be a really great tool to create change in the world. And then we've invited Professor Keith Edens to come and speak just about how important debate can be in professional life, as well as just skills throughout your life, the skills that you can learn through debate and through speech. And then just to put everything into action, I've invited two high school debaters to come and give a little demonstration debate for us so that we can see really what debate is. And then we can have a Q&A with the debaters and with Keith and everyone at the end. So what we've been doing this week is, as I said, communicating persuasively to achieve social change. And what we've been talking about is we've been focusing on a few different social issues in the world and the things that must be changed in order to create change in our society. And so these are issues, some examples are climate change, access to healthcare, marriage equality, and there's obviously a lot of other issues that in order to have a better society, we need to be able to improve these issues. And there's a lot of tools to address these issues. And those are things such as social action, journalism, but another really big one is the power to communicate orally in order to be convincing, persuasive, and just be a good speaker is a really great tool to create social change. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today is debate, because that is a huge communication skill and that is really necessary to create change. So speech and debate is, as I said, a huge tool for change because you learn a lot of skills through speech and debate, but also just the ability to be convincing, to convince people is just such a really good tool in order to create change. And there's a lot of different things that come out of debating. And those are things such as you need to be able to make really well-reasoned points and well-supported points. And that makes it so that what you're saying is more convincing. You're obviously harder to argue with if what you're saying is convincing. And it's just, that's a great skill in general throughout life, is being able to make a good point and make something very clear for other people to understand. And it's also another big part of debate is being able to understand different perspectives, because in debate, there's obviously two different sides or multiple different sides to a topic, and people have very varying opinions on a lot of things. So being able to understand what someone's saying and try and see where they're coming from is really important, not only so that you can have an open conversation with someone or an open debate with someone, but also so that you can improve what you're saying and you can figure out how you can change what you're saying to make it more convincing. So that's really important, is not being closed-minded in the debate and being able to make sure that you can just understand where everyone's coming from. And then, oops, one second. And then another big thing is that you are trying to be persuasive in debate, and you're trying to provide arguments and reasoning and proof that just are very convincing to people. And that's a big thing in debate, as I've said, is just being persuasive so that at the end of a debate, people agree with you and people want to understand what you're saying and agree with what you're saying. And that's just a great skill, not only in a debate setting or in a competitive setting, but also just throughout life, is being able to be persuasive so that when people walk away from hearing you speak, they agree with what you're saying. And that's really important to creating change in the world, because if we want to change something, we need more people to agree with us. And being able to persuade people is how you can do that. And then lastly, another big skill that comes from debate is this framework that's super common in debate, which is the AREI framework. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But that is a framework that is super useful and super helpful throughout life, but also in debate. And so the AREI framework is assertion, reasoning, evidence, and impact. And that is a framework that you can use not only to form an argument, but also when you're writing essays, and just really any time that you're forming an argument in any setting. And it starts with the assertion part of this. An assertion is your claim, and that's sort of your statement about the world that people are either going to agree with or disagree with, but that's your initial statement. And so in this case, as an example, I have poverty is harmful. Obviously, I think most people would agree with this one, but that's sort of your initial claim. And then you move on to reasoning. And reasoning is the because part of the argument. So after you've made your claim, you have to start explaining it. And that's the next step, is explaining the essential arguments and giving a reason or a why. And so in this case, continuing with this same example, we have poverty is harmful because when families are poor, they cannot regularly feed their children. So it's a reason why poverty is harmful. And this is a pretty simple one, but you can just sort of see that this is the reason for our assertion. Then you move on to evidence. And evidence is super important because after you've made your claim from your assertion and given a reason, there's still a lot of gray area and there's still a lot of room for disagreement. But if you can provide someone with evidence or a statistic, then it's a lot harder to disagree with you. But an important thing about evidence is that evidence needs to be very credible and verifiable. So you need to make sure that your evidence is coming from a source that it's difficult to disagree with or people trust that source. So maybe a source that doesn't have a lot of bias. And it also needs to be verifiable, which means that you need to be able to see similar things from a lot of different news outlets. So it's not like one news source is giving you a super big extreme and then you're not seeing something similar from other places. It needs to be convincing. And so a piece of evidence that would work well for this point that we're making is that poverty is harmful because when families are poor, they cannot regularly feed their children. And then here's your evidence. According to the US Food Institute, in 2018, over 68% of children and families living in poverty miss more than 10 meals per week. So this is just a piece of evidence that can really make it much more convincing. Once you've heard that evidence, it's a lot more convincing that this is something that people need to believe in. And then is the impact. And the impact, in my opinion, is the most important part because it's sort of what people are left with, or it is what people are left with. It's the takeaway. And your impact is the so what factor of an argument. And how does this particular reason in your argument make a significant difference? And a lot of times the impact also carries some sort of emotional value. It's really what you want people to walk away with is the impact. So in this case, for this example, we have if we as people ignore poverty conditions, we not only cause harm to the health of our citizens, but also harm the fabric of our entire society. So we can see that we've made this point and then we're leaving people with this overall understanding of really why this matters. And that's really important in a debate because you want to make sure you can make your points as clearly, as well thought out as anyone. But then at the end of the day, you really need to prove why what you're saying is more important or more impactful. And that's where the impact comes in. And the AREI framework, I use it all the time in debate because it's just a great way to make a clear argument. But I also use it all the time when I'm writing essays that are persuasive essays or really just making an argument in everyday life because it just is such a clear format and it makes it a lot harder for people to argue against you because it's so easy to follow along what you're saying and it's always just very clear when you use a format like this.